Like there. Ones? So which ones are like, these ones are both need to be.
Yeah, because people who are speaking
Yeah,
those are
okay, okay.
I include this one in my to that two. All these are judgment.
Okay.
Basically, the volume is for anyone is from outside. Then
Oh, okay. I'm not going to be doing. That's not. Okay, great. All good.
there,
One I will share. I didn't want the rest shared, but this one, since it's a special one, I will share it.
Oh, how's it going? Oh, there is a
It is.
understood. Do I just show these guys the other slide?
I mean, if not, you can just click the.
Well, I tried. I think the computer may be frozen.
Oh, okay.
There we go.
Perfect.
Yeah, that's about it. It's just so two slides.
Perfect.
Do you want me to sit here?
Is that everything?
Yes.
Yeah, I need it.
That's the highest it goes.
I didn't catch the time with respect to opening up for questions, kind of division of time
Look
in
at
that
the table,
sense.
15 minutes left for questions.
15?
15 for questions.
Okay.
Would you like person to give you a 15-minute while we're discussing, or
Maybe,
No.
maybe so just the discussion, the overall
Overall
session,
plan?
does that
Yeah,
work?
overall.
okay, so she'll
Yeah, because I think,
15
I think this paper will probably have more audience questions,
Okay.
I think,
Okay.
but we'll see. I'm
Okay,
so
good.
short
Yeah. I
No,
have no problem
there's-
with that.
here. Did we-
It doesn't go higher.
Do they go up?
That is,
They
so,
get lower.
they get lower.
This is the
Yeah,
maximum.
you're saying these chairs were not made for short people.
I think those got higher. Do you want that one? The white? No, this is the lowest one.
It doesn't work. Okay.
Doesn't go any lower.
Okay. I will try to be
You can scoot over here if you're
yeah.
monitor, or do you think it's fine?
Yeah. I'll do
Go a bit
yeah.
higher. You wanna sit on this?
I feel like I'm avoiding you guys, you know?
It's like spreading apart.
Just a bit higher. There's another one over there.
That one would be higher.
That isn't high.
It's okay.
Okay.
People will see me when I stand up. My 5'7" glory.
So more generally kind of framing context questions, like kind of grounding it into what we know about empathy, how it relates to expressivity, that kind of question, as well as kind of a deeper level question about policy, like what does it mean for policy, so that you have a heads up as well. We got the feel that scary scenario, so to speak. So as you like, right? Feel free to go there if you'd like. Feel free to stay away. I think generally speaking, that will push us towards how HRI practitioners, researchers included,
Yeah.
have been kind of in that safe zone,
Mhm.
living in this unicorns and rainbows and everything's fine. We're just fine tuning little things. Do we want like blinking eyes in there versus not?
Mhm.
Whereas actually there's larger, bigger problems.
Totally.
Does that work?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Did you guys fly in yesterday or?
Yeah, we were supposed to land in 8:30 in the morning, but we landed at 5.
Both of our flights got delayed for 3 hours because of maintenance issues on two different.
Not even
two different.
stores. The same air.
Oh,
Yeah, Spirit Air.
but did you guys get to Detroit and then
Yeah.
text you over? Okay. Welcome to Canada.
Thank you. We were bummed to miss yesterday. It was
Yeah.
really fun.
Yeah.
What you gonna do?
There is dinner.
Everyone keeps mentioning the techno-fascism thing.
We were really excited for
Yeah.
that.
That was fun.
Fun.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Scary.
Yeah. What else should I tell you? I think I'll just rant.
I think that's good. I think, yeah.
Feel free to add things that I might be missing.
I'm sure you got it. We were looking at some of the other 80 pages. Of these things. How did we get into this? But happy to be here. Very happy to be here.
Yeah. Very happy to discuss HR papers. Great. Yeah, I've got that's my student in the back. Mingle with my my HRI/AI ethics student. Is it just the two of you from Oregon?
Oregon State.
Bill couldn't make it, eh? Do you guys know Bill Smart?
Yes, I do. Yeah, I was asking Dr. Bitter about that.
I have heard that there's
He's,
a
he's
person.
very busy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw him at once. I don't know.
You guys been doing this work on ADR for quite some time, both of you, or?
I'm an undergraduate.
Oh,
So
yeah?
I'm a junior in electrical engineering. So this is I've been working in Dr. Bitter's lab for 2 years. That's it.
Where's the undergrad are?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been working on it from last summer, I think. Yeah. I haven't been working on it much, but I've been doing like more work on the ranked choice questions with the policy implication questions.
Which questions?
The policy implication questions. Yeah.
He's public policy. I'm engineering.
Are you also an undergrad or?
No, I'm a PhD second.
Just like-
Yeah.
Oh,
newer than a lot of.
Hi.
Hi, Kirsten.
I love the blazer.
Yeah, it's great. Like my futuristic robot answer. Can I just make sure I'm pronouncing everyone's name right?
Okay.
Adeline Schneider?
Adeline.
Adeline. Okay, so glad that I double checked.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Did Bill have it correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, yeah, like no one uses that usually. Wasik was perfect.
Like, I say something, but
No, it's fine. Wasik is perfect. No, you did it perfect.
I think so. It kind of flex the hours, minutes of opening up for audience questions depending on how things go.
well, yeah.
Yeah.
You'll, it might be a couple of RAs are kind of just giving like indicators.
Yeah.
Set yourself off, but like just to keep things on time.
Yeah.
And then if you guys respond like 15 minutes, and then we'll try to open it up as early as we can.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there's gonna be lots of things, and yeah, like if we get like 30 minutes
Yeah.
for questions, that's
Yeah. 30 minutes for up here.
yeah, like 30 minutes for you guys, and then 30 minutes for you.
I was gonna give you a heads up when it's 1 minute before Q&A.
Oh, okay.
That's how we're that's how we're gonna do it.
Okay.
There's some back. She got that, and it's 15.
Yeah.
Is it weird for me to stand
No,
so that there's a? No, I mean. I think it'll be okay. Yeah, this seems like a fancy, check. Everybody can hear me kind of.
and it's good for, there's a bunch of people talking. They can only hear you.
Oh,
Oh, okay.
yeah.
That's good to
It's
know.
good for projection and it's good for.
Adeline is an undergraduate student. Did you know?
That's amazing. You guys did a great job.
I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear that.
And it's not.
Okay. I'll keep it. Okay. Okay, no worries. Hello, undergrad. You might be the only one. You might.
I have no idea. Yesterday, food was pretty good.
Oh,
so
yeah.
I have big hopes.
Dinner's gonna be even if lunch is amazing.
Indeed.
Did I just find out? No, we're running it right. That's okay. That's actually the right thing. Better is not on.
Hello, everybody. We're going to start our next panel. If I can grab everyone's attention. Okay, so we're going to talk about smiling robots. We're very lucky to be joined by 2 of 3 co-authors for our next paper. We have Wasak Billa and we have Adeline Schneider. And our discussant is the amazing Ajung Moon, who was at the original first We Robot. So turn it over to you guys. Thank you so much.
Hello, everyone. I believe we are the session right before lunch, so hopefully we'll keep you as entertained as possible before our hungry tummies take over. I'm Ajang. Just to contextualize, I'm a human-robot interaction researcher who kind of turned into an AI ethicist by an accident in career, so to speak. So I kind of merge roboethics, HRI, and AI ethics together, and that's the lens through which I've read this paper. So the paper that we're discussing today is what I would call a classic HRI paper, but presented at We Robot, which I'm very excited about because I don't think we get the opportunity to have human-robot interaction discussions often in this with this audience. So very happy for that particular opportunity. So thanks to the authors for that. And I'll kind of get into what is so classical about this paper in a minute. But just to introduce you to this paper, the paper itself is relatively short. That's also one part of the HRI, classic nature of HRI, which is, well, we keep it to about 8 to 12 pages. And if it goes over, we start to pay for our publications. So we keep it short. And so when we read other We Robot papers that are, tens of pages long, we start to kind of realize, oh, this is a very different video. Okay. Now, the focus of this particular paper deals with something that is quite new and interesting on our roads. So the authors look at the autonomous delivery robots, ADRs in short, 2 different morphologies of them that are on the public streets today. They're being used, they're real products. One of them is Starship, apparently much more commercialized, much more popularly used, and Dex, which is less popular, less used per se, but still exists with perhaps very similar look. It's got the similar kind of aesthetics to it, but the authors make huge distinctions between them. And the way that the authors would like you to look at them is that one of them has a head. It's got a head, it's got these eyes, it's meant to be much more expressive, whereas Starship, not so much. It's more of a 2 feet all around it. It's got these wheels, and it doesn't necessarily express anything of value, perhaps. Now, here's a description of the 2 different morphologies of the robot. Starship, more of a boxy robot. 2 feet across all dimensions, the 6-wheeled robot features a set of headlights inlet into the front of the robot, blinkers on the back, onboard speakers, and an orange flag that lights up for visibility. That's about it. Dex, taller, more cylindrical shaped robot with 2 sets of treaded wheels and a distinct head attached to an articulated neck, which means that the robot is designed specifically to be capable of expressive behavior such as nodding, shaking, and cocking its head. Okay, why is this important for policymakers? I think that's the core of what this paper is really trying to bring your attention to. It's really this this notion of does the expressive nature of DEX versus Starship deserve policymakers' attention and perhaps different kind of policy discussions just because of this morphology. What makes this paper a classical HRI paper is that there's a sample size description. We've got 100 participants between subject study. We've got an online participants who are watching a series of videos of either Starship or DEX doing various different things, and they are asked a bunch of different questions, upon which we do quantitative inferential statistics, and we say, we support the hypothesis X, Y, Z, or we fail to support the hypothesis, and therefore the realities of how humans perceive one robot versus another is X. That's essentially how classical, I would say, quantitative human-robot interaction papers go. So in its structure, with its classical nature, the results of this paper is really perhaps straightforward. The authors find that the DEX with its head is perceived to have more warmth and competence over Starship. You might be thinking, why is warmth and competence over robot really interesting? Why is that something that we measure? Well, the context behind it is that within human-robot interaction, these are some of the measures that we have learned to embrace in measuring as social perception measures. Because we have been measuring things like what is the perceived intimacy of Starship versus DEX or any other robots? What is the perceived intelligence of a robot or perceived safety and so on and so forth. So there are many different kind of standardized metrics that we have been using, but the ones that we have been using much more frequently and almost becoming a standard within HRI is something called ROSES, which is this social perception of warmth and competence. So demographics, we have male participants, female participants, African Americans, white Americans, and people of different age groups as well. And the study really looks at what are some demographic and other factors that seem to be in play when we ask them specific kinds of questions about these their perceptions of these delivery robots. They find that males are more concerned about robots being tampered with or broken into. Females and the older population are more concerned about the robot's ability to communicate. African Americans, compared to the white Americans, want to make sure that these robots can delete all the saved data on board. Whereas the white Americans are much more concerned about robots straying from their route or their path during the delivery task. And overall, the younger population seems to be more concerned about the safety and security issues related to the robot. And building on these results, the authors are arguing that roboticists must consider these broader social implications of ADR design, and they call on the policymakers to acknowledge that these robot morphologies and personalities really significantly impact the way we perceive these robots in the first place, and therefore we should keep them in mind in policy making in the first place because they are now part of our public spaces. Within HRI, I would like to contextualize this paper a little bit more within known existing findings within the human-robot interaction context. And one particular context is really about anthropomorphism. I would say the authors are really looking at this notion of expressivity, the degree to which the robot can express and communicate and have signals that seem expressive to a particular person. But I would say that is a subset of what we have been studying in HRI for many, many decades under the umbrella term of anthropomorphism. Humans are hardwired to anthropomorphize, and that's something that we know, that we have learned and have empirical evidence from psychologists, which means as soon as you have even a car, as soon as you have an object with googly eyes, humans will think or express that particular object as though it is a human-like thing. There are many different theories that have been proposed with various empirical groundings to suggest that yes, indeed, when humans encounter something novel, experience some novel experiences, then we like to express things or interpret things or verbalize things in a way that is very human-like, in part because, perhaps, we know ourselves and our experiences the best. And therefore, when we call a robot he or she, which is
one aspect of anthropomorphism. We do that because genderified language within the English language in particular is something that we naturally do, and that's natural for us to do. And when we want to communicate something about our experience to another, we anthropomorphize because our assumption is that the recipient of our messages are human. So if I use human-like analogies, then it'll be better communicated. So that's something that we have learned to understand, that it's part of humans. We have to design around it, design with it. Within HRI, though, we have made some progress about anthropomorphism and what makes one particular morphology of a robot more human-like to a human perceiver versus another. And Phillips and colleagues in 2018 made a bit of a rather large study on this, and they essentially said that there are 3 or 4 kind of features that make a difference. The first and the foremost is the facial features. Brings back to Dex. Between Starship and Dex, it is a clear indication, we can probably even quantify it, that because of the fact that Dex has a face-like or head-like feature, we can quantify it as being more anthropomorphic in human perception. There are other things like body manipulations, such as have arms and legs, and then surface look. But apart from that, that is that. I would say we also know that as soon as you have a robotic system that is more anthropomorphic than others, we have empirical evidence to show that people perceive that anthropomorphic robot to be more warm, more competent, which is also verified or validated by this particular empirical study as well. So it's not really a surprise there. Not necessarily novel finding per se. Now, with that anthropomorphism, I think we are in an era where these kinds of robots in particular, autonomous delivery robots and many other robots that are entering our spaces, are becoming very trendy for HRI practitioners to study. In part because we can. Now we have the tech, AI in particular, that allows us to develop robotic systems that can navigate in more cluttered environments, dynamic environments. Those are the ones that humans tend to be in, which means that we started to have this term called INCOPs, incidentally co-present persons, and their perception or their interactions with humans. It's a funny term. We essentially mean that in traditional kind of human-robot interaction literature, we've been overly studying one-to-one communication or interaction between one robot and one user, the user that we care about, the user that we're designing for. And we typically bring them into our labs and we study the heck out of them. That's been the norm for many decades, until more recently, we started to realize, well, we kind of know who the user of Starship or Dex is. These are the people who are using an app to order a delivery or something along the lines. And when when a particular delivery is made, they open it up and they paid for that delivery service and they take the food out or whatnot. Okay, those are the people that we have been tuned to design for. We kind of ignored everybody else as humans and their interactions, their perceptions, when we put these robots on the road. And that is also one of the reasons why HR practitioners are thinking, this is a bit of a problem. We have all these other non-users who are also humans. They sometimes bully these robots. There are documented cases of robots in shopping malls where children would run around them and then bully them and call them names. There have been incidents of robot security system that has been pushed into a fountain because people didn't like it in the context that it was deployed in. So in reality, we are seeing a lot more robotic systems that are built for specific targeted user groups that fail horribly in practice. So I would say we are looking at a paper that is really looking at the overlap between anthropomorphism, what we know how to tune as HRI practitioners and designers, and the rise of understanding these humans, non-user humans that we also care about because sometimes they're violent and disruptive. So,
This also brings back to the link that I would like to make between this particular paper, where it's situated, and the We Robot community, because I would say Kristen Thomason, our conference chair, has written a particular paper on the changing nature of public spaces and where robots come into play there. For her article, she was looking at much more of the privacy implications. When we have these robots, we necessarily have many different sensors that end up being used for surveillance purposes, or that we can actually leverage them as tools of mass surveillance. But her point in her article many years ago is really the question: how should regulators approach the task of regulating robots in public spaces? And should any special considerations apply to the regulation of robots because of the public nature of the spaces they occupy? That's a quote there. Her answer to this particular question is that a robotic system put in a public location should never be prioritized over humans. In this particular case, I would say her argument is really about humans more broadly speaking, rather than just the users that we optimize for. She further discusses other humans, I would say, who are not part of the participant pools in this study, such as people who are experiencing homelessness. Okay, well, as we start to clutter up more of our streets with food delivery systems or automated delivery systems that often have food, whichever you want to frame it, how do we want to envision inclusive design with other individuals who may start to feel very much threatened by the existence of these robotic systems? I would say this is perhaps one segue into a call for deeper reflection about classic human-robot interaction papers and our tendency to stay fairly positive and optimistic about the actual functionalities that these robotic systems are intended for. We just want automated, cheaper deliveries. We also have, perhaps, a motivation to make deliveries much more accessible for people with mobility challenges. Then we often forget the real implications where when these systems enter our roads and break down and block the accessible rampways on crosswalks, that's a huge hassle for somebody in a wheelchair who really needs that ramp access. We don't really consider them at the design time. So broader question I would like to open up with the authors is really this: to what degree should these demographic factors that we are studying in an HRI paper really be at the fore of policy decision making? And to what degree a lot of these design decisions and their implications should be on the part of HRI practitioners so that we actually design better? And where do we draw the line between HRI practitioners playing hero, so to speak, to say this is an unethical design, this is the ethical design, or maybe even having a paralysis because there's really only trade-offs in the real design space? To what degree can we draw a line between being good and code is policy, and therefore I'm going to make the policy as a designer, versus, okay, here are the scientific facts that we know about demographic findings about human perception of robots, and let the policymakers deal with it? Because in fact, I would argue that participants who really embrace this particular types of systems or raise security concerns, or people who actually think, the real issue with this is break-ins and people tampering with the system, I think those are the white males that actually prioritize those issues, maybe because they see themselves as direct users and beneficiaries of these systems. Whereas the older population and the female population had more questions about communication capabilities of these systems. As in, maybe I, as a woman, don't necessarily see myself using the system, but I will accommodate it if it's on my road. I will leave it there for your response.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and like kind of encompasses what the core of what we're trying to get at this paper, which in a lot of ways I think is, for me as an engineering student, is directed at engineers as well as policymakers, but also like as engineering students are raised to be very like apolitical in nature, and so these ideas that like the people in this room are thinking about are of even asking the question like I think engineers don't even ask the question like, well, why would we need to think about race when we're talking about delivery robots? Why would we need to think about gender? This is a robot that brings you your food. And so I think we are really trying to bring that question to people that are designing robots and say, you do need to be considering these social factors that are part of the community that you're integrating these robots into. You do need to be asking a question, that was raised in the last talk of like, do we need these robots in the first place? The first question that these startup bros are asking isn't, does the community want this technology? How are they reacting to this technology? It's, do we have a user base that will pay us money? And so I think that's a really important point. And I really agree. I hadn't thought of it that way, but I really agree that I think there's this element of, white male users seeing them, or white male participants seeing themselves like more from the user perspective, and then older and female participants being more concerned kind of about the community impacts. And then there's also that thread in the paper of like, we see like Black and African American participants being more concerned about privacy and data deletion. And, that's something that kind of makes a lot of sense given, the history of the United States and this surveillance technology. And like something, even with the DAXBot company, we're seeing are branching out currently into like security robots. So obviously, like I think there's something to be said there about the kind of like surveillance complex and the prison industrial complex. And the like lack of consideration there. So I think that's a great point, and thank you for bringing that up. Do you have anything to add?
I'd say that with age as well, like some of the older population will probably be using the ramps as well. So the issue you brought up with the mobility and access, that will also resonate with them, and they would really prefer to have like robots that communicate better so that they know how to maneuver it. And in one of the other parts of the paper, there is like robot collisions where you hit into a robot or the robot hits you, or you see a robot in distress being harassed or bullied. So you can really see the difference expressiveness makes to a person when they perceive such a situation. And I think in terms of playing hero, I think, yeah, that isn't exactly something we should be trying to do. We should really just focus on highlighting these issues instead and really showing people how, especially with the way they said, oh, one of the other findings was how much data is being collected. So Black people were really concerned about their data being deleted. But there was another issue on how much, especially for Starship, because it's a boxy design, people are not really aware of how much data it's actually collecting because you can't really see the eyes.
Or what type of data?
Yeah, so because it's kind of mysterious. So people are really concerned about these kinds of issues that show that privacy is really important to communities before they deploy these kind of robots.
Yeah, maybe building on that. I mean, there are morphological questions that we can ask about. Why don't we make it even more cute and cuddly, like a teddy bear robot on wheels that actually happens to deliver food for you, and then it might have even more cameras and microphones and everything else in between, and collect the heck out of the data, so to speak. And I would say roboticists are starting to have healthy discussions about how we can use cuteness as a dark pattern. We can kind of manipulate people just by making things cute and making you assume that it's for beneficial and cuddly kind of purposes when you can actually use them for other functionalities as well. So my question to you would be, I mean, a lot of this paper builds on your previous work on doing interviews and qualitative discussions on this. Were there any insights about that kind of concern, or maybe more broader imaginations of what could go wrong just because we are perhaps looking at literally robots on wheels with cameras that happens to be used in a delivery application, but it could be used for many other applications?
Yeah, so the past work that we did was focused primarily on the Starship robots, which are actually used on Oregon State's campus. So something that We have a huge pool of students, faculty, and community members who are interacting with these robots, kind of as the in-cops term that you used, on a daily basis or frequently. And I think that something that we saw in those, we did like a 30-minute interview-based study with community members who have, interacted with these robots in some way. And a common thread that we see here, and I think the goal of the Starship robots and why they are designed the way that they are is, I mean, one for lower cost, lower, maintenance. We see like the Dax robot needs a lot more maintenance because it does have that head joint, so that's more likely to get damaged. Versus the Starships are relatively easy, relatively durable. And so I think part of the reason, though, that the Starship, a lot of participants commented on this kind of like all white, very quote unquote boring design. And I think a lot of that is to kind of this like unobtrusiveness is the goal. I think that by the perspective, and this is totally conjecture, but I think the perspective of the Starship company is that they can kind of make this almost featureless robot that that people are not offended by in any way, and that when we talk about that anthropomorphism that kind of aspect of it, we see, and so a common thread we saw in that work is that people will still, despite this lack of expressive features on the Starship, will still describe it as cute, or kind of use that gender language, call it he or like a little guy. We saw a lot of that, and so I think there is that aspect of kind of trying to make something that people can project what they want onto it. So like these older people like tended to see it as more of just a functional tool, whereas younger people were more likely to kind of make it into a character or a personality. And so does that answer your question? I got distracted.
I'd like to add some stuff to that as well. I think in the previous study, which was just based on the Starship, there were like people saying that was cute and like a pet and stuff. But in this study, there were some open-ended questions as well, and we found that compared to nothing, Starship is seen as more, more warm. But if you compare Starship with DAX, the addition of these features really take DAX on another level. So even though people might see Starship on its own as being cute, when you have DAX next to it, it's like makes a big difference. Another thing is there was a lack of knowledge or perhaps naivety about people's data. They always say that they want the privacy, they want the data to be protected. But when you ask them questions about, so who do you reach out to, like who's protecting it, they have no idea. And then we give them some options as well, like what happens, who do you reach out to? They just list them out, but they really have no idea about this. And in terms of the other question about surveillance, I think even in law generally, you guys would know more about it. Like individual privacy is more protected than say group privacy. So like when they're collecting pictures and videos, they're collecting like essentially data about groups, not individuals. And I don't think in law it's protected that much. And that's what surveillance is being used nowadays, to target people who are in groups, not individuals.
Yeah, I would add another thread that we saw a lot in this previous study, from I think 2024, is that there was a lot of misunderstandings about what data was allowed to be collected. We saw that people assumed that there was more legal protections that there were, and also assumed that the Starship specifically, I think the Starship technologies, their privacy policy says they're allowed to collect and store all of their data for up to 60 days. Unless it's involved in an incident, and then they can keep it for more, I believe. But people are totally unaware of this and think, just kind of assume that the way it should be is the way that it is, and assume that data is deleted much faster than that. There's no way that this company is allowed to store this basically 360-degree video view of these communities that they're in at all times. So I'll just add that.
Maybe we'll open up for audience questions. Should we go for the audience, the online one first?
There.
Go ahead.
Hi, Luke Stark, Western University, Information Media Studies. So this is really fascinating, and it's related to some work that I've been doing more on the design and regulation of things like ChatGPT, so virtual bots. But I just wanted to get both the authors and your Ajung, perspective on where the conversations on regulation of expressivity and anthropomorphism are, right? Because this to me is going to be a major question going forward with chatbots, especially, right? We have a whole conversation about digital avatar companions that convince young people to commit suicide. You know, there's just the number of different kind of virtual examples of this have really proliferated. So I wonder what insights from HRI you might bring to those kind of digital bot conversations.
I'll say like my understanding is that there is little to no regulation on this kind of anthropomorphic element or expressive element of robotics. Yeah, I'll admit my policy knowledge is limited, but I would say this is something that we are still like beginning to understand, and that is something that we're beginning to see, right? Is those like suicides and that greater impact. So I think like a question that we are asking in this work, and something that is definitely needed in future work, is like what kind of are people forming attachments to these robots? Do the expressive features kind of facilitate that more emotional connection to the robots, and what effect does that have on participants? And then more broadly, what does that look like in chatbots or beyond these kind of delivery robots? And so like something that our lab is researching as well is the like prolonged use of assistive or social robots in like assistive nursing facilities. And that again is an environment where these kind of social robots could form more long-term relationships with vulnerable populations. So I think that's definitely something that needs further research. That's what I would say about that.
Yeah, and in terms of AI, I think there is definitely anthropomorphism coming into play as well. I think like in the early 2000s, we had Halo with Cortana and like people making AIs that make it human-like. And then recently, like Bixby, you would see them in expos that bring in a robot that's technically an anthropomorphized version of Bixby. And they're always trying to do that into it as well. So definitely, even if you can't see it physically, you'll definitely start seeing them in your phones, like a 3D version. Or so, yeah, that will definitely come into play. And I don't think it's being talked about as much at all. So,
Yeah, and I think that's where my kind of gripe between software-only systems and physical systems kind of come into play, because when we start to kind of frame robotic systems as embodied AI, then we kind of think, okay, all the horrible things that we're seeing, the effects of AI and people's emotional attachment to bots and so on and so forth, it'll just translate into a physical body, and that we can regulate it as such, and we're done. But in part, within HRI, we know that's not really how humans think. Physical objects are different. As soon as we make them move, your likelihood of being attached to a particular thing that is moving and is acknowledging you is so much stronger that we can even manipulate it to a degree that we haven't seen before. So I would say we don't have the kind of regulatory discussions on this yet, although I think the harms and risks of these kinds of systems and the kind of relationships that we're kind of fostering between your human and robot context is being had within the research community.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd love to talk more about that offline, because this is really interesting. Thanks so much.
Hi there, Bianca Wiley. I was going to talk for a minute about accessibility, and I'm glad that came up. And it's fairly new for me too. So what I'm proposing is something I'm learning through. When we talk about sidewalks, the municipality is generally the governance or policy people that you're thinking about. There may be federal or regional, state, provincial flow, but one of the lessons I think we can learn from the last couple decades is that they are the point at which these things hit the population and the residents, and also the least well-funded, with the least capacity to deal with it, and also have this conflicting interest where cities want to be innovation spaces. So there's a lot of pre-existing tension, and just from the disability community perspective, there's still a fight in the city I live to have all our subways compliant with existing regulation. So I think one approach is to think within the community that compliance is a product requirement, that you don't make it so the people who are in the city have to then add this to the fight of like, I can't even get to the subway properly and now I'm having to fight the robot. Like the capacity just isn't there. So I think that's, and I'm so grateful that you're doing the work right now to expand the way that your field is thinking about this. So thank you for that. And I think the final sort of closing prompt I have is when you talk about this, now I get to say the word, it's like the anemone and Nemo, I knew it.
Anthropomorphism. You
Anthropomorphism.
can tell that I practice it.
I know, like set up that mental gate. Is that the way they're received? It sounds like that is not taking into consideration someone who's low or no vision, low or no hearing, neurodivergent, because it sounds to me, I'm just saying how it sounds to me, someone listening to this for the first time. But I think trying to take that lens through all of the thinking might be really interesting because and I'm so glad to hear of Kristen's work, of course, thinking about different contexts in a city and who's having the experience. So really appreciate the work. And if you have any thoughts on this here, great. Otherwise, just wanted to say I'm trying to think about this too. So in case it's helpful.
Yeah, awesome. I would definitely love to connect more about that later, because that's something I've been thinking about quite a bit. A couple things I will just say is I think that one issue that we're seeing right now is these the Starship robots are really popular. They're on, I think, over 30 college campuses in the United States. There's some in Europe as well, and something that they're very common on college campuses because that is a very like condensed environment, usually not a lot of traffic, like car traffic going through. And so they're very, they can be very useful in that sort of space where you have a lot of sidewalks, you aren't seeing a lot of like traffic, but they are kind of starting to branch out into more cities. And we are seeing this more common in we're seeing these more commonly in like your traditional cities where we do have like those greater it's more complicated. And then so in our interview study, we heard about people on Oregon State's campus who are experiencing like the Starship. I mean, they're 2 feet across. They're not huge, but that does take up a considerable portion of the sidewalk. And I mean, this is my opinion, but their navigation ability is limited. And so they do fail. They do get stuck. They're supposed to kind of yield to humans, but that means that sometimes they just stop in the middle of the sidewalk. And we have heard about people in wheelchairs like not being able to get to where they're going or completely altering their routes to class, having to take like totally alternate routes because these robots are just integrated into the communities like suddenly without any consideration for that. So that is totally an issue and totally something that we are seeing being a very real, very common issue and something that these robotic companies are not thinking about. And even something that they are, I would say, like I've seen, and again, personal opinion, something that I think is almost gross is these companies will advertise as like an accessibility thing.
I forgot to say that. Thank you. That's the thing.
Like they will market themselves as like, this is great for people that have mobility issues that can't get out and get food. And so using this community as kind of a marketing standpoint, but not addressing the real concerns that this has for the community.
Fantastic. I'm so glad you brought that up. I was like, there's a thing. And the campuses are probably private.
Yeah.
So this is where you get into this regulatory vacuum space. So, but that's a great point back as to where a lot of it's happening. Thank you so much. Love to talk about it more.
Great. Okay, so I have a feedback on the paper, and then I have feedback on your whole research agenda. So that's what's happening. That's what's happening to you right now.
Awesome.
Yeah. Okay, so on the paper itself, really great paper, very solid work in HRI. No notes. I would say that with respect to regulation of robots, there's an oddly lot of regulation in the United States about these robots. There's like 20 some odd states that actually have laws governing these robots. And what they tend to say is that these robots have to look exactly like Starship. And the reason is because Starship went to all these different places being like, y'all need to be welcoming this new wave of innovation. And here's our robot. And so all robots should be about 90 pounds and have 6 wheels and blah, blah, blah. And I wonder whether had DAX gotten there first and had the clout to, you know, in the early investment, whether morphology might have been on the table, but because it was Starship and they don't have this, you know, anthropomorphic quality quite as much, that may explain why not. Okay. The other thing about the paper is I think you'd really benefit from a couple of papers by Victoria Groom back when she was at Stanford with Cliff Nass, the late Cliff Nass. In particular, I Am My Robot, where she studies how accountable people feel for tasks based on the morphology of the robot itself. So she has people do different tasks, I mean, the same task, in one case using something that looks very humanoid, and then the other case looking something it doesn't. Very similar to your setup here. And what she finds is that when people do something with an anthropomorphic robot, they're more likely to say it was the robot's fault, or praise the robot when it goes well, versus they think of it as themselves when it's a non-anthropomorphic robot. So that agent in the middle, and you might imagine why that would have interesting ramifications for feelings of liability, not literally liability, but whether it was satisfactory to punish the operator when intuitions would reside some of that moral culpability in the machine. Okay, so that's about the paper, and then about the research agenda. So exciting. I just want to note that there are 2 ways primarily for HRI or other social scientists to engage with policy. And one is to ask questions about how does my work end up influencing public policy debates. So you could take a paper like this and you could speculate at the end and you could say to yourself, oh, this could inform issues about privacy notice. This could inform issues about, you know, safety and other kinds of things, right? The second avenue, and one that I wonder whether you could explore a little more, is to choose experiments and choose research projects based upon questions that policymakers are already asking. Where would you find that? Well, you'd look at Federal Trade Commission workshops. You'd look at agencies requesting information about AI through the notice and comment process. You'd talk to people who are regulators in the space in Oregon or California, right? Now, obviously you're contributing to a field of HRI, and so you want to make sure that you're also contributing to that field. But is there a way that you can simultaneously tee up a question that a policymaker can then plug directly into what they're already thinking about while not compromising the rigor and integrity of your work? So those are my thoughts about your wonderful paper and your very cool research agenda. Thank you.
Yeah, thank
Hello.
you.
You always know when something has like permeated into popular culture because it starts showing up in shows. So when you guys are talking about the delivery robot on college campuses, I'm sitting here thinking about it's like this great scene in The Sex Lives of College Girls where they attack it. Just thought that might be a fun little vignette. It's not what I'm here to say. Hi, I'm Katie Salegi. I'm a law professor at the University of Manitoba. And before that, I was an engineer a long time ago. So I love to see the engineering HRI research. Very cool. One of the things I noticed in your data, which was interesting, was that you had recorded people's ethnicity. Maybe we didn't talk about that much. There is some interesting research in the HRI space about how people's cultural perceptions, right, mediate their understanding with bots. So I'm thinking in particular, I have a colleague at the University of Manitoba named Jim Young, and in his HRI lab, they did a really cool project where they had this robot, his name was Sam, and Sam went out to University Center and would interact with folks and ask them questions. And based on a pretty simplistic understanding of what cultural group they happen to belong to, Sam could then use script to design the questions to be more specific for what culture group are you coming from, right? So
what the finding was that people who come from individualist cultures would be more inclined to say, sorry, Sam, like I've got class, I gotta go, I'll leave you on your own. And people who come from more collectivist cultures, so particularly East Asian countries, South American and Central American countries, just felt too bad about Sam's questions and could not possibly leave Sam hanging, right? And so they stayed there and they interacted with Sam for a long time and ended up late for class and like all kinds of stuff like this, right? So I wonder about thinking when like as another lens on the anthropomorphization piece, which I think if you add a little more of some of that anthropomorphization stuff to the analytical part of the paper, I think it'll really make that part pop. But I just think this might be one fun other dimension is who are the people interacting with these bots, right? When you're interacting with the bot and you are responding to the facial features or responding to the expressive, what are you as a human person bringing to that interaction? And are you bringing a cultural context where you are prioritizing your own experience or you're prioritizing someone else's experience? Because that might add another layer in addition to the gender dynamics that you identify in the text. Cool. I can give you after the name of this paper, which has a good name. Good Design or Machiavellian, good robot design or Machiavellian. In the Wild Robot Leveraging Minimal Knowledge of Passerby Culture. I can send it to you.
Okay.
Okay, bye.
Thank you.
All right, so our first question from online is from Brandon DeHart. He says, Roddy Brooks' first law of robotics states that the visual appearance of a robot makes a promise about what it can do and how smart it is, and that it needs to deliver or slightly over-deliver on that promise, or it will not be accepted. This law seems to match well with the author's hypothesis, and he's curious if the authors believe that the policies should be built specifically around the appearance of a robot or around its actual functional capabilities.
That is a great question. This is not something I've thought about a lot. My instinctive answer is maybe a little bit of both. I think it is probably, I think like as the way the law is written, my understanding again is that it's very much based on form. Like again, we have these specific laws that are for delivery robots, and there's very little in the way of regulating based on their expressive capabilities. So I would say both. I think we absolutely need to be thinking more about a robot's social abilities and about its level of expressivity or anthropomorphism. But I think that's absolutely a conversation that we need to be having more than we are currently.
Yeah, I also think it's both. It definitely has to fulfill its function. Otherwise, there's no point in having such robots in the first place. And we need to focus on the expressive features just to make sure that we are considering the social impact of these robots on the streets. If it wasn't expressive, people would have no idea where it's going, what it's like trying to communicate. So definitely a bit of both.
Well, maybe building on that as well. Sometimes when we say expressivity, we kind of think about maybe something very explicit like eyes or even verbal communication, ability for speech communication. But in reality, even the speed at which the starship slows down to stop or actually nudges somebody, just by having it move around, I think that there's a lot that we can communicate. So in a way, when we tackle the nonverbals of the design space, we actually have very expressive robots already. Just we don't frame it in that kind of morphology terms.
I will jump in with the next question because I think it goes nicely into this. It's from Paul Calhoun, who says, I'm interested in how to quantify expressiveness, and I'd love a follow-up on the people who flee from running into the robot. I assume it's more ignore the collision and keep walking, but the word flee was an interesting choice. Is there a reason why that choice of word, which seems to imply fear rather than apathy, was selected?
Because it measures something.
Yeah, I think we're all wondering how to quantify the expressiveness of a robot. I think that's something we think about a lot in HRI. We have these like kind of established measures, like something like in our lab at least that we use really frequently to kind of check that box almost in a way, is we do use this ROSAS measure of its warmth, its competence, and like the level of discomfort that people feel from it. We also use like these Godspeed scales that can measure stuff like animacy or people's perceptions of the robot's animacy. And so I like that. I think that is something that we think about a lot, is like how do we quantify like I think like for me looking at these robots like as a and I think like as an engineer looking at this, like the amount of effort that it took to make that head rotate, that's extra effort, that's extra cost, and it serves a purpose from the perspective of the engineer, the roboticist. But I think there is that question of like how do you measure that, and that is something that we struggled to do, I think, a little bit at the beginning, is like how do we even define, or how do we convince people that this robot, these robots that do in a lot of ways look very similar, like how do we convince people that this is a big difference here and something that's worth studying? So that is something that we were thinking about a lot.
Also, in terms of the options for that question, there was like assist the robot, no response, contact police, and stuff like that. So we just wanted to get a sense of them feeling like they're in trouble, and so they're running away.
Yeah.
So when we asked that particular question, there's definitely no response, like they're doing nothing, and want to make a distinction between doing nothing and actually deciding to go away from that situation.
Yeah.
So that's probably why.
It was almost a like hit and run option was kind of the intention with that, and whether or not we captured that in our wording is, I guess, up for criticism for sure. But we were trying to kind of capture that. Like there's, again, like Wasik said, there's a difference between not responding and then actively fleeing the scene.
Hi, I'm Michael from the Robotics and AI Law Society based in Berlin. And I found two aspects very interesting. The one is the use of public space, and the other one is these passers-by, like third people who are concerned. And I just want to throw in some kind of doctrinal facts of the law, how it is dealt with in Germany and Europe, because it might be of interest. So we don't have any delivery robots at the moment in Germany because motorized vehicles are not allowed on sidewalks. So even if you have these funny e-scooters, they have to be on the street. And on public spaces, there's always a priority of public use. So this is a commercial use. So you would need a permission. So even if you have a cafe and want to put some some chairs on the sidewalk, you need to get permission. And there's an impact assessment of versus accessibility. And so if there would be people not going by with a wheelchair, you would not be allowed to put these chairs. Just wondering how the law is here, but we can discuss this also in the break. But this is just as a kind of doctrinal thing. Then we don't have it, and then they say, okay, when you have to, if it's a motorized vehicle, it has to be a car, and then the regulators say, well, it's not a car because it's too small and doesn't fit on the road. So the roboticists call basically for you have to make a special category for these kind of delivery robots to make it possible to have them on space. So my question here would be I'm just wondering if there is like any use cases that which are not using the sidewalk or like public space. I mean, I'm sometimes thinking about drones, flying to your balcony and delivering it. You have a maybe noise pollution, but at least you don't use the public space in a way that it's like, is there any other like designs also for delivery that are not like this that you know of? And the second part that I found very interesting is like the passerbys, because if you're a consumer or like the customer of this robot, you have a contract, and then on the contract you can, at least according to European data protection law, you can legitimize using the data. But if you're just walking by, it's a different thing. You have no consent of the person, you don't have a contract, so you need some kind of legal provision allowing you to use this data. And what you say about the 60 days and the 360-degree view reminded me a bit of Pokemon Go. I don't know if you guys read this blog, late last year, where, the developers basically admitted that they also used Pokemon Go to just take pictures of spaces that they haven't had any pictures yet. And we have it with Google Maps. Like in Germany, you could opt out, and then it's like your house is somehow blurred. But, how do you do it with this kind of technologies? And then I think there's a kind of tendency in technologies. We saw it in Germany for automatically reading license plates of cars. They first said, okay, we'd only do it for collecting tolls, and then they said also we do it for only terrorism, and then it's like for everything. So in a way, by allowing these things at first, and then at some point it turns out it's a surveillance technology that kind of gives perspectives on public space and communities that maybe fit into the puzzle of like these surveillance actors who don't have it from a small perspective or high perspective. So I'm wondering how these aspects are maybe also buying into the design of things and how you can prevent it. I would say, like, according to data protection law there, 60 days is not, the purpose of this robot is not to collect data of the community. So it's like purpose driven would be not in conflict with this principle of purpose limitation. And it should be deleted right away. I mean, it should not even be saved. Is there any design choices also from privacy preserving technologies, maybe to say, well, you can drive, but you just don't save it, maybe on device only, maybe only on the cloud. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are on this. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'll try to keep it brief again. We're not trying to keep people from lunch. I think as for like other forms of like delivery robot technology, I think the only one that I know of is that there are some companies that, I don't know if they still are, but have tried using like basically vans to carry like large amounts of these robots, like, and then drive those around for the majority of the delivery. And then kind of they have this like last mile system where they let the robots out of the van and then the robots kind of disperse and do that kind of like within that last mile radius, which has some positive benefits for like carbon emissions because you don't have 7 cars going to a similar place. So there's like some of our past or some of our related work like has looked at that sort of thing. That's all that I am aware of in terms of other forms of delivery.
Yeah, I'm not aware of other forms.
Yeah.
I think drone is the other main.
Yeah, drone. I don't know of that. I'm sure it exists, but I'm not aware of that being widely implemented anywhere. Although I'm sure it is. And then as for privacy, I think there's like I think that's a big focus of both of ours. Is the privacy a big concern? Again, that like the kind of passersby issue of people that, if this is integrated into your community, there's no agreeing to a terms of service, there's no kind of consent, there's no opt-in to having your data recorded. And again, the breadth of data that these robots are able to collect is something that is much more than people assume, and certainly much more than people are willing to agree to. So again, these starships have almost 360-degree, like constantly video recording. I believe they have microphones, but don't quote me on that. That's another thing. The Starship company is very secretive about kind of what kind of data they collect. And then so like some things that I know they have talked about integrating, or other robot companies have talked about integrating, is kind of limiting the height to which they can the camera angle can get, so that they're looking mostly at like the ground level and not at people's faces, or automatically blurring faces is one thing that I've seen as well. And I think that like that is something that we need to be talking a lot more about, and we need to have more conversations about, especially as these again are being integrated without asking for people's consent.
All right, let me talk. So I just want to finish on a dark note. I'm not. So I'm like.
Excellent.
I'm focusing on AI policy in my PhD program, and like in a recent course I took about new media and society, like technology has shifted from its mode of broadcasting information to collecting information. So now that's called it's an epistemological shift. So every device we use nowadays is basically a sensor. Something is smart because it knows what you want. So your smart fridge knows when you open it, your smart lights knows when you come home, and all this information is just being collected by all these corporations without our knowledge or consent, or we just have to say accept if you want to avail these services. So the amount of information our smartphones, computers are collecting, like just the metadata, like all the sites you visit, what time you open up, what time you sleep, what time you go somewhere, the location data, it's a horrible place now.
On that note,
Actually,
I believe we are out of time.
Oh, this is really
Oh.
fast. Starship has delivery robots in Milton Keynes in the UK.
Okay.
And some years ago, they ran around broadcasting Boris Johnson's pre-election message. When they start broadcasting as well,
I'd say it's an addition to it. Like before, it was just broadcasting, but now they can also collect. Like a smartphone also gives us information, but it's also collecting.
Thank you. I think this is one of those papers that kind of married roboticists excited to have robots on the road and then actual reality check. So thank you so much for that.
That was a wonderful conversation. We are about to go to lunch, but first, I'm going to keep you for one more minute. The wonderful director of the LTech Lab here at Windsor Law has a quick announcement, and then we'll be back at 1:30 for a phenomenal panel of not one, not two, but 3 papers on AI governance. So please be back at 1:30, but now I'm going to turn it over to Pascal.
Okay, hi everyone. Bonjour tout le monde. Wow, what a fabulous conference so far. So kudos to my dear colleague, Kristen Thomas, and the whole team of We Robot 2025. This is like really, really great so far. So this is wonderful. And yes, LTech Lab is a proud sponsor of We Robot 2025. What we're doing, we're a community of interest network, research interest group that looks into law, technology, intellectual property from a social justice, transnational, and access to justice perspective. That's very much what we're all about. And for us, EDI is not a dirty word. That's very much the values of equity, diversity, and inclusion really guide the type of conversations that we want to have, the people we want to bring in together, and so forth. So as Kristen mentioned, there is an exciting announcement. Our wonderful LTech Lab RAs, I've thought about a contest to make you find out more about what we do. So I'll leave Jessica Kabuli to give that announcement. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. You might have seen me at the registration desk this morning. Sorry for the chaos there. But right by the registration desk, we do have the LTech Lab table where we have our lovely QR sign up. If you sign up to be a member of the LTech Lab, we are going to have a raffle or kind of a draw tomorrow with a very special prize. We're going to announce it right here tomorrow afternoon. So please, on your way out for lunch or anytime during the day, come to our table and sign up and you might be our lucky winner. Enjoy lunch, everybody. Thank you.